I got my first job at a supermarket when I was 16, nearly 17. I had just gotten my own car and it was summer, so I was free to work as late as I needed. Since it was a small town, ours was the only grocery store that stayed open 24 hours. Normally, we were dead after midnight, so I spent my time organizing shelves or reading something I brought along. That night in particular, I was scheduled to work 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. On any typical shift like this, there were 2 clerks. Tonight, it was me and Jen. Jen was a team leader that had been here for a few years by then. She knew that store like the back of her hand. Well, that night, I went in at my normal time and began the shift. Jen was there before me, and upstairs we had talked about how the weather was supposed to get ugly later in the night. Not unusual, since we were smack dab in the middle of Tornado Alley. The only reason we were concerned was because we were still working to get our generator fixed from the last tornado. During our shift, we had a gentleman who was soaked from the weather rush inside. He was tall and didn't seem dressed for the conditions. He wore a black fleece jacket, jeans, and regular sneakers. He didn't make eye contact or even return a greeting. He just walked towards the back of the store while whistling this weird tune. It was unnerving to both of us. We made a vow that until this man was gone, we stuck together. Something about this man made both of us uncomfortable. Something was disturbing about him. Something about the way he kept his head down, never revealing his features. Well, time continued to pass. The weather was still awful, and sure enough, our power went out. Me and Jen were horrified, realizing that we were still in the store with the man. We had to make it to the back room though, so we could alert our boss of the outage. Not wanting to go alone, we took the walk together. Halfway down the chip aisle, we heard something in the next aisle cluttering to the ground. Both of us stopped, trying to figure out which way it came from. It was silent once again when we started moving again. Then, same thing, something on our aisle this time fell to the ground. Instead of the silence that followed, we were greeted with that eerie whistling tune. It sounded like it was behind us and in front of us all at once. We stood still as statues, listening. When the lights came back on, both of us jumped back and let out a shriek. The man was directly in front of us now. He stopped whistling, but smiled and showed us teeth that were rotted, and some looked sharp in a weird way. Me and Jen backed up and headed back to the registers. I distinctly remember always looking back to make sure he was still there, until he wasn't. Panicking, we hunkered down at the registers and watched for any movement. Finally, after nothing, he left without buying anything. Relieved that he was gone, we took a collective deep breath, and I left Jen to go get flashlights and our purses, just to be safe. I was gone 6 minutes at the most, but my heart dropped when I came back to the man now talking to Jen. From afar, I could tell she was scared. I steeled my nerves and went to join her. The man had then asked if we could come look at his car, that it wouldn't crank. When we explained we both couldn't leave the store, he explained that one of us going would be enough. Hesitantly, we both tried to politely decline, saying that we both had to be in the store because our higher-ups were watching the cameras. Things got weirder when he told us that our cameras didn't work. I wasn't sure how he knew that, but something about him saying it gave me chills. Then this man proceeded to yell at us, spit flying everywhere when we wouldn't go with him. Me and Jen simply stared in horror, not sure how to de-escalate this. He was slamming his hands down on the counter and saying he needed us to look at his car. Why he would ask us, I have a pretty good idea now. This man continued to yell and tried to come behind the counter at one point. The only saving grace that night was when another customer came into the store and was trying to check out. Seeing him come in, the man put his head back down and walked into the storm once again. Shaken up by what happened, we called the police and filed a report. The police seemed pretty put off by it, claiming that they had likely just stressed out and got mad that we wouldn't help. Well, fast forward to the end of our shift. Our relief came in and both of us walked to our cars together. As we got out to them, we saw that not one, but both of our cars had something in a single tire. Crouching down to look, we saw that it looked like someone broke off a box cutter blade in our tire to force a flat. My gut knew right then what that man was doing. We ended up letting the police know about the tire incident, but never heard much else about it. Shortly after our experience, Jen switched to the day shift, and I left entirely. I don't know if he's been back or if he was a drifter. I don't care to know. I just know that we weren't going outside to help him jumpstart his car after all. It was the middle of the night, and my roommate Jason started banging on my door. It woke me up instantly. I really needed to get some sleep before all my classes tomorrow, but he just wouldn't stop knocking. He shouted my name through the door. I pushed myself out of bed and answered. "What the hell?" Jason was very clearly drunk. He could barely stand on his own. He said that he wasn't able to drive. Obviously. He said he needed me to drive to the 24-hour grocery store just off campus and get him Cheetos. I couldn't believe it. I told him no. I said I needed to get back to sleep, but he kept pestering me until I finally gave in. I figured that a quick trip to the shop would help me calm down. Besides, I'm not the most confident person, and it's really hard for me to say no to people. So I got in my car and drove to the grocery store. Aside from one cashier, it was completely empty. I grabbed a bag of Cheetos and some energy drinks that I'd have to use in the morning. I gave the cashier my stuff, but he just put them in a bag without scanning them. Then he told me that I owed him $50. I knew that wasn't right. I noticed that the man wasn't wearing the dark green shirts that the cashiers usually wore. He had a baggy flannel shirt and he looked kind of dirty. There was grass in his hair and his eyes were kind of glazed over. I felt like an idiot for not noticing this before. There was something very wrong with this man. "Are you sure it's $50? I asked. He leaned closer and whispered, "Are you calling me a liar?" I backed away and my foot brushed up against something on the floor. I looked down and saw the body of the real cashier. He was crumpled just under the next checkout line. His dark green uniform was stained with blood. I looked back at the fake cashier, who just smiled at me. He knew he'd been caught. "Oops," he said. Then he grabbed my bag and swung it at the side of my head. The cans of energy drinks hit me right in the temple. I felt woozy and had to catch myself on the shelves. Otherwise, I would have fallen right on top of the body. Then he jumped over the counter and tried to attack me. He grabbed me by the collar and started screaming at me. He said the most insane stuff about how he owned the grocery store now. He said that he was the new president of the store and that he'd kill me if I didn't pay him the $50. I didn't want to fight him, so I said, "Okay, I'll give you the money with a tip." He let go of my collar and smiled. He was missing most of his teeth. I reached into my pocket, but instead of pulling out my wallet, I grabbed the can of pepper spray I always kept with me. I blasted him in the face and then raced out of the store. The police were already outside. I guess they'd just arrived. They ran in and tackled the man to the ground. I watched through the windows as they cuffed him and took him away. I told an officer what I'd seen. He commended me for acting so brave, but I just got in my car and drove back to my apartment. Jason was waiting for me on the couch. "Where are the Cheetos?" he asked. "Get your own damn Cheetos," I told him. "I'm going to bed." From that day on, I stopped taking crap from him. If I could stand up to a murderer, I could stand up to anyone. My name is Aiden, and I hate my family so much. I have a twin brother named Cole, and even though we literally have the same DNA, for some reason my parents treat him like the golden child. I was the academic one, who got good grades and won debate championships and stuff. Cole played football and went hunting with Dad and his buddies. No matter what I did, it could never compare to Cole. When Cole's football team got third in the state, Mom called up the local papers and threw a giant party. When I found out I was valedictorian, all I got from my parents was a hearty handshake. We both graduated last year and went to different colleges. Dad ended up paying for Cole's tuition, while I had to use all the scholarships I'd earned to pay for everything myself. It wasn't fair. I wanted to get as far away from Cole and my parents as possible. I decided to stay in the dorms for Christmas, but when spring break rolled around, my dad started getting on my case to come back for the week. He said that everybody missed me, especially Cole, but I didn't believe that for a second. Still, I booked my flight and went back. When I entered the house, Mom and Dad greeted me with big hugs. Mom was even crying. I was instantly suspicious. Why were they acting so excited to see me? I asked where Cole was, and they said that he was up in his room. He was taking a nap, but he'd come down later. I wanted to sit down and catch up with my parents, but Mom asked if I could swing by the grocery store and pick up a few things. I'd just come from the airport, so I really didn't feel like it, but Mom basically begged for me to go until I finally said yes. She handed me a list, and I was about to leave when she stopped me and said I needed to change outfits first. She said I looked sweaty from the trip. I really didn't want to, but she already had a shirt and khakis ready. I did a quick change in the bathroom and then drove Dad's car to the grocery store. I looked around and was surprised that the place was so empty. There weren't any customers in the store, but when I got closer to the back, I saw a single cashier talking to 3 policemen. He was sobbing, and his arm was bloody and bandaged, as if someone had slashed him with a knife. I knew that something bad must have just gone down. Maybe there was a robbery. I started to back away quietly when the cashier guy looked up and noticed me. He pointed and screamed, "There he is! That's the man who attacked me!" The police instantly drew their weapons and ordered me to get on the ground. I was terrified. Why would this guy say that? I dropped to the floor and waited for the cops to come to me. I looked up, just for a second, and noticed that there was something else on the floor. A red pocket knife stained with that cashier's blood. The attacker must have dropped it when he ran off. The knife was kind of far away, but I could still recognize it. That was Cole's knife, the one that Dad gave him for a graduation present. That's when I put all the pieces together. Cole had done something terrible. He'd probably gotten into some stupid argument with the cashier and ended up stabbing the poor guy and fleeing. And my parents, knowing that the police would come after him, forced me into going back there, wearing Cole's clothes. They tricked me into taking the fall for my brother. I told the police where the knife was because I guess they hadn't seen it, but they just took that as more evidence of my guilt. As the police cuffed me, I tried to explain the situation, but they wouldn't listen. One of the officers even kicked me in the side to shut me up. They shoved me in the back of the police car and drove me to the station. They took my fingerprints and mugshot and everything, and then sent me to some tiny interrogation room. I sat across from a policeman who asked me why I did it. I told him that it wasn't me. It was my twin brother. He didn't believe me at first, until I told him to take the plane ticket out of my wallet. I still had that with me, and it would prove that I was at the airport at the time of the attack. He looked at the ticket, but he still didn't believe me. He asked why my family would set me up, and I explained that my brother was the golden child. I sort of went off, telling him about all the times in my life when my parents had screwed me over in favor of my brother. He nodded gravely. I'll always remember what he said next. He said, "I understand. I have a brother too." By then, the fingerprints on the pocket knife had come back, and it was clear that I was being framed. I gave them my parents' address. 2 officers drove me back there. I waited on the lawn as they led Cole away in handcuffs. He was screaming the whole time. Then they let out both my parents, also in handcuffs. Neither of them said anything. As they walked right by me, I just smiled. I ended up spending the rest of the trip in their empty house. All 3 of them have tried to call me, but I refused to answer. When spring break ended, I flew back to school. That was the last time I ever saw them.